The NBA draft is next week in Miami, at least for now, has a selection to make. We look at the possibilities, the approach of the draft, and what needs they might look to fill with a young player. Are they looking for the next superstar or just another rotation player? Plus, we break down some recent comments from LeBron James about what would happen with him on this current Heat roster on today's edition of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Heat Nation. It's a Tuesday edition of Locked On Heat, your daily podcast covering all things Miami Heat. However, you may be listening while we're watching on YouTube, Odyssey, or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for making us your first listen every day. I am David Ramil, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Wes Goldberg. We've got a great show lined up for you today. Of course, as I mentioned before, we will be talking about LeBron James and whether or not he would be a great addition to this Miami Heat roster. But before we do that, the NBA draft is next week. It's actually Thursday, June 23rd. And as such, we are going to be diving deep into our draft-related content. We're going to have lots of shows over the next few days about specific players. We're going to have our in-depth scouting reports. We're also going to measure them in terms of what their eventual impact will be. Will they be a fringe rotation player? Will they be a superstar and such? It's a great episode. We're calling it our Blue Notebooks, and you'll see why over the next couple of days. But before we do that, we just wanted to give you a little primer regarding the draft. Just kind of talk in general overtones about Miami's approach to the draft, what they might be looking for, and answer some big questions about whether or not they even bother keeping the pick. So I think that's kind of worth getting into. What are your thoughts on this draft overall? I know you've already been digging deep, doing some research on potential draft prospects. What's your overall takeaway from this draft selection?
Well, first of all, I love draft prep. It's one of my favorite parts of the year. I love getting
too.
deep into the scouting reports. I know you're being sarcastic, but
No.
this is probably the biggest way that you and I differ on this show is just how much you and I care about the draft and get into the draft and value the draft. I know that you're more like, I think you're more of the Pat Riley school where you kind of look at the draft picks as assets. Things that you can use to sweeten trade packages and things like that. You'd rather have the proven player and kind of mess around with the undrafted guys. Where I think I'm a little bit of the new school where I really, really value selecting players in the first round. And I actually do think that the Heat need a pretty substantial infusion of high-level talent. Despite them being one shot away from making the NBA Finals,
Right.
It just felt like so much of what they did in the playoffs was basically bandaged over by Jimmy Butler being just awesome. And
Yep.
I don't know that I am of the mindset that Jimmy Butler is awesome and can continue to be awesome for a couple more years. But I don't think that you can just sort of rinse, repeat, hope that shot goes in, and then you're in the finals next year. I really do think that if you're looking at where the drawbacks on this Heat roster are, and we can get into specific skill sets and position groups and things like that. But David, I really think that they are at a bit of a talent deficiency. When you're relying this much on the undrafted players, it makes for a great story. And you love to have those guys on the roster. But I do think that they were a little over-reliant on them. And that when push came to shove, that was one of the reasons why they're not in the NBA Finals right now. And it's one of the reasons why I'm watching this NBA Finals between the Warriors, which with a bunch of lottery picks and really talented players, and the Celtics, which ditto. And I think the Heat would have been maybe outclassed in these finals just from a talent perspective. And that's why, again, and it's the end of the first round, which is so much different than the top of the first round. It should be two different rounds. It should be. The talent gap is so extreme, but.
I think it's different now. With the one and done nature of the college game, the fact that players can go and play professionally overseas or even join the NBA G League team, the Ignite, who we've got a couple of prospects that will be scouting from them. I think there's a lot more opportunities. I think you're more talented players. Like there are players that are on the G League Ignite that might drop to Miami in 27 with the 27th overall pick, and they were like top 10 prospects in high school. I think talent is, for me, is always such a problematic word because it's so hard to equate. Is it based on your rankings? Like what makes Zion Williamson, for example, more talented than other players. I don't know that talent
Well,
is the
I
right word.
think,
Like
yeah,
athletic,
that's a good talent is sort
explosive.
of this catch-all, right? And this
Yeah,
is what you and I talk about with Tyler Hero. It's like, yeah, he's not the most quote unquote talented or athletic, but his
right,
basketball feel is off the charts, and
right,
that's not teachable. So is that considered talent or skill or what is it?
right,
I
right.
You're right. I should reframe that and say I think there's just a raw athleticism
That's
deficit
fair.
on the
And
Heat
I was thinking,
roster, and
I,
that's usually what you get when you're getting into the top of the first round. That's why you see
right,
these raw prospects who are just like, wow, he's never done anything. Like he was playing in the
right,
second league in Europe. Why are you drafting him? It's well because he's 6'10" and 240 pounds and runs a 4.40 and has a 40-inch vertical. That's why we're
right,
drafting him. And those guys are more rare than probably anything in the basketball world. And so
right.
you just take a shot. And sometimes it's Giannis and sometimes it's Derek Williams, and you don't really
Say,
know.
or
And
say
so,
doing booyah, right?
right, exactly. So, but to your point, it is changing, right? Like not because the path to the NBA is so much different. They're
Yeah,
sourcing from so many different places. When you're talking about the crossing borders into Africa and more places in Europe, and what's going on in New Zealand, where LaMelo Ball came from, and a lot of other players. The pop that's happening in Canada right now is a real one. And so there's more sources of great basketball talent than I think there ever was before. And you look at these NBA finals and you've got two players playing major roles for both teams, right? Jordan Poole, end of the first round, Robert Williams, end of the first round. So you could
yeah,
find guys to play really big roles. And that's why I'm more of the mindset that the Heat, look, not everything's black and white. If something comes available, then and you need to use this 27th pick, then you go ahead and use it in a trade. But
right.
I would be very happy if the Heat took somebody at 27 and really did their homework on this and maybe brought them in and groomed them and saw them as an eventual rotation
Pure
piece.
cornerstone. Yeah. Yeah, maybe not a cornerstone, but good. A solid impact player. And I think that's, I was looking at this exercise and thinking to myself, what makes this year stand out in terms of what the Miami Heat process, what their thought process is behind this pick. And I was thinking about years past. The 20th pick, the late first round pick, didn't mean as much to them in terms of, future development goals. And why? Because you needed an impact player. Because the Heat, like always, were competing for a championship. So what did they prioritize? They prioritized older players, guys that had spent 4 years in college. Josh Richardson, Tim
Yeah.
James, Norris Cole, guys that could come in, make an impact in terms of being a rotation level player, and that's it. Small role. Josh Richardson was a fluke in terms of one, he exceeded expectations, and two, they were partly in a talent drought during the couple years that he was there and expected to become the on floor leader for this team. That's a whole other story you can get into. They were without a clear superstar at
Yeah.
that point because there was an older Dwayne Wade, et
Well,
cetera.
do you think this team then is more of the big three where you're looking for somebody who played a little bit more and is more of an immediate contributor?
Oh, I
Or
think
is
it's
it
different.
more of that team that was in a talent
Well,
deficit and
I
was
was going to
looking
get to that.
after guys like Bam and Tyler, guys who were more of one and done type guys?
I was going to get to that because to me now the avenues are different. Now you can add players that are undrafted. You can add a ton of players elsewhere, and Miami has shown time and time again that we can continue to mine players, find them elsewhere, and be
Yeah.
able to develop them and have them become those kind of short-term impact players that you can just kind of run through them quickly, like
Right.
Max
And
Strus,
the
etc.
Sioux Falls Skyforce are a thing now in the way that it wasn't during the Big Three era, which is a big deal.
Exactly. So I think if you're looking at what Miami's thought process is behind the 27th pick is that they'd rather take a player that can do both. That can be an impact player in
Yeah.
terms of what they can immediately bring to the table, but also has that athleticism, explosiveness, that kind of quote unquote talent that could continue to develop them and eventually have them be future starters alongside Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, and whoever else happens to be on this roster.
Somebody who
So I
can
think
get on the floor a little bit in the regular season. Maybe you get a couple of minutes from them here and there in the playoffs in the first 2 or 3 rounds. But even like you look at the teams now in the finals, the Celtics and the Warriors, they've got rookies and really young players who are promising they really like, but they're just not playing in the finals because they're,
right,
rookies or within their first year or two in the league. And that's fine, right? That's absolutely okay. But they've also gotten major contributions on their way to the finals from those younger players too. I'm with you. I think if you're the Heat, you've got to look for somebody who is of a high athletic caliber, I think, again, because that's where your deficit is on this roster.
right.
And maybe because of that athleticism and one NBA type of skill that can get him on the floor early, but you obviously like the upside too, where you can groom that player. Because just imagine what this development, everybody's like, well, why would you bother. You could get guys like Max Strus and Caleb Martin on the fringes of the NBA. And well, imagine what this developmental team could do with this, with like a first round piece of clay, as opposed to the undrafted piece of clay. That should be exciting. That's another reason to me to use this 27th pick, as opposed to just look to aggressively shop it.
I think you're spot on. Like, even as we're going through this discussion, like, you look at Strus, you look at Vincent, you look at Duncan, all of them great players, and yes, NBA athletes, but not pure athletes, not the kind of explosive talent that we're looking at across the NBA. And that Miami can, because of their greatness right now, their current greatness, and the fact they have a young roster. Like, I'm a little surprised. I asked Pat Riley about the age of this roster, whether it was a concern, and he looks at this team and says they're a young roster. I don't see how, when you've got Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry, and PJ Tucker, and Udonis Haslem, of course, on this roster. But I can understand his thought process is our development guys are young-ish. Maybe that's a debate for another time. Right. But I think they can also afford to kind of sit on somebody that is going to be a long-term prospect and can eventually continue to grow, as long as they have that raw athleticism, explosiveness, whatever.
Look what they did with Bam. Arguably the best defender in the NBA, raw piece of clay, a guy that not a lot of people knew about, and he was at Kentucky, and he was just buried on that roster. But they turned him into maybe one of the best players to come out of Kentucky over the last decade, and there's quite a few of them. I mean, Cat, Devin Booker, all these guys. Bam's got to be right up there when we're talking about those guys.
Absolutely. So we'll talk about some of the other potential prospects that might fall at 27, as well as get into some comments from LeBron James later on in the show. But before we do that, I want to tell you about a new sponsor of our show. Look, everybody is totally in love with NBA Jam right now. Boom shakalaka, right? Isn't that the catchphrase that everybody remembers? We've got big news. The one, the only NBA Jam is back. Arcade 1-Up, the leader in at-home retro arcade games, is not only bringing the best game ever back, but they've made it bigger than ever with a, wait for it, Shaq edition machine. Now, of course, Shaq, as a former Miami Heat player, so many people gravitate towards him. Still a big personality, always going to be remembered for being one of the best players of all time. But now he's got his own video game, his own edition of NBA Jam. People are obsessed with the game, of course, and we're thrilled to tell our listeners that you can once again play hoops with NBA legends in this arcade classic. I wonder if they have Alonzo Mourning in his Charlotte Hornets jersey, where they used to back in the day, right? Would they make the switch? I don't know. That's be interesting. Jump clear across the court and set the ball on fire. I wish you had that sound effect that you always use about the NBA Jam. That's the one, baby. And one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitized NBA licensed teams. No fouls, no free throws, and no quarters required. You compete with friends, family through this all-new Wi-Fi leaderboards. You're making you more connected than ever. You can pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade, the number 1, up.com for an estimated early September ship date. Oh, perfect Christmas gift too. Arcade 1-Up is the piece for fun. They've got even more classics like Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, and many others starting at just $3.99. I was always not Mortal Kombat, kind of Street Fighter. That was
Mortal Kombat was better.
That's debatable. Check this out. They are giving away an NBA Jam Shaq edition to a Locked On listener. They're giving one away. So enter for a chance to win a game console for your man cave or your home in general at arcade1up.com/lockedon. That's arcade, the number 1, the word up.com/lockedon. You've got till July 8th, so almost a month to enter to win NBA Jam's Shaq edition console. Don't miss out. Enter today. Who are you going to play with? Speaking of the draft, the ultimate NBA mock draft starts on June 16th with over 50 insiders. Nothing equals the NBA mock draft on Locked On. Locked On draft experts plus the Odyssey insiders will be there to give you all the information you need going you pick through pick. The first pick is June 16th, so search Ultimate NBA Mock Draft and follow now so you don't miss a pick. Miami doesn't miss picks a lot. They might not prioritize them the way that other teams do, but they usually hit on the right player. Like, you can argue that Justice Winslow maybe was a disappointment, but injury notwithstanding, like, he was the right selection. He was the obvious selection at that time. 9 other teams passed up on him, not from a talent level, not from a talent perspective or anything like that, but just because they had other needs that they thought they'd prioritize. So I think that's kind of what we're thinking about when in terms of like Miami and how they approach the draft. They always do their due diligence, without a doubt, whether they have a pick or not, because you never know when you trade for a pick somewhere in the later rounds and make a selection there. But we're going to look at some of the the players that might fall to Miami in 27th.
Sure.
What are your thoughts about some of the players that stand out in terms of like what Miami might actually
Yeah.
need to fill on their roster?
So I actually think the Heat could go in a lot of different directions with this. In one respect, there's an argument to be made that they need more shot creation. And so you obviously
Yeah,
think about a wing or a ball handler, somebody who could play next to Jimmy Butler and even Tyler Herro, obviously Bam Adebayo, if you're talking about that as your core. And so if there's that level of shot creator in the draft, then that makes sense. But at the other side of that is that player, a young, obviously player, going to be too much overlap with somebody like Tyler Herro, who is still
right.
trying to get his feet wet as and trying to get into the starting lineup, obviously, and getting more minutes. And usually these shot creators at the end of the first round, they're shot creators, but they're not really great defenders. And so now you're worried about those defensive issues. And then I think there's a need for a wing, especially when you consider Miami's free agents. If it's Victor Oladipo and Caleb Martin, I think we all just kind of write in Caleb Martin on next year's depth chart in pen, assuming he's going to be back. But I'm not assuming that he's a free agent. He could. Who knows what's going to happen? So, and by the way, it's not like he's super young. He's going to be 27,
He needs
right?
to get paid. He needs to get paid.
And he needs to get paid. I think you said it before. Like this might be his only big NBA contract, and so he should be smart about this. And I'm sure he will be. And
I
so yeah, no
tweeting.
guarantee about whether or
I
not he'll
remember
be back.
tweeting after one game, like in December, like when he was having like one of his big moments or something like that. I was like, "Oh, congratulations on future Portland Trailblazers, Caleb Martin, like on his 4-year, $24 million deal. Like if he can get that offer
Yeah.
elsewhere, he's gonna take it. There's no
If
doubt about
Portland does that, then Damian Lillard will demand a trade immediately. He'll be, really, we're doing this again. What is this,
it.
2016?
Yeah.
And then there's an argument to be made that you need a big because Dwayne Dedmon is a free agent. We talked about that in our last exit interview on Monday. And I think the Heat were a big man short, even with Dwayne Dedmon. I thought in the Eastern Conference Finals, and I think you could use somebody that's a little bit more versatile at that position. And so when you're picking at the end of the first round, you don't really get to be picky.
Yeah.
It's impossible to figure out how the dominoes are going to fall, how the board is going to fall. By the time the 27th pick comes around, there could be somebody that was projected to be in the lottery on the board still. We see it all the time. You could see or all your top 5 guys might be gone, might have been picked already. And you're kind of looking at somebody who might be considered more of a second round type of guy. We see that all the time too from other teams picking at the end of the first round. So to answer your question, I almost think it needs to be best player available. Obviously, that
Mhm.
player's skill set has to fit with what the Heat do, right? When you're talking about the way they play defense, the way they play offense, you probably need somebody to be able to shoot even a little bit at least.
Mhm.
And so all those things come into play. But it kind of also goes back to what we said in the first segment, which was you want that player to at least have an NBA ready skill that helps him get onto the court early, especially in the regular season, so that developmental process can begin. I don't think you want to go totally raw here, but I also don't think you want to just play it safe and go with like the NBA ready guy who doesn't have as much of an upside.
Right. No, I think that's a good point. And just in thinking of like how Miami has approached this in the past, like they don't necessarily shy away from adding somebody that they already have somebody like on the roster already. Like they added Bam Adebayo, wound up re-signing Hassan Whiteside for $100 million, and then wound up bringing in Kelly Olynyk as a free
Yeah.
agent too. So it's like we already have 2 centers. We're going to draft another one anyway, and that's just the way they approach this. It's like, you know what, we want the guys with talent, especially when it comes to a player like Bam and has
Yeah.
that kind of upside. I think you're willing to take that chance. So I don't know if that player will be available at 27. It's again, as you mentioned, it's difficult to foresee that, but there's a lot of different prospects out there, a lot of different potential options that Miami could fill there. I know we've already started. Go ahead.
No, I thought we can name a couple names here that have just been
Yeah,
out
let's
there.
do it. I love it. I love it.
ESPN on their latest mock drafts has them taking Arizona's Dalen Terry, who
Nice.
I've already done some scouting work on. I really, really like him. I really, really like him, David.
He's the
And
guy who has both. He's the guy who is a combination of
exactly,
both, right? Like he has the length, the kind of no, I wouldn't say he's explosive athletically, but he has a certain level of athleticism to him, and he doesn't have like any great level of skill. But at the same time, he projects out as a great scorer, great shooter, and great defender.
yeah.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, you just watch the film on him, and he's always moving. He's always active on both ends. Defensively, there's a lot to like there. His wingspan is awesome. It's plus 7 feet,
Yep.
which is great. Sports Illustrated has the Heat taking Jake LaRavia. He's the kind of power forwardish kind of guy from Wake Forest. Um, he's interesting because he's more of that NBA ready guy who doesn't have
Yep.
that ton of upside, and that's sort of what SI was writing in their logic for mocking LaRavia to the Heat, is that, the Heat obviously just need players who can play now because they're trying to win a championship. And that's
Exactly.
logic I understand. I don't know. I don't know what the Heat think of LaRavia's upside either. People said Tyler Hero didn't have a ton of upside, and the Heat took him, and they think that he does have a ton of upside. But the LaRavia thing is interesting because he shut it down at the combine after like a day. And the rumor going around is that he's comfortable knowing that he's probably going to be picked between 20 and 30. And obviously Miami, and some people think he's got a promise. And obviously Miami is right in that range. I'm not saying Miami made him the promise, but I don't
I
know.
don't think they've
So
ever engaged in that sort of.
it doesn't seem to be their thing, right? That's not really their
No,
deal.
because honestly, they're so open to everything, including up to and including trading away that pick
Right.
on draft night. That
Good
they're
point.
not going to say they're not going to bend over backwards for some 22-year-old kid, 21-year-old
Right.
kid, or whatever. I mean, that's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
going to hold
Especially when they
their
might trade the
franchise
pick,
hostage.
to your point.
Right? Yeah.
That's a good point too, because the Heat will make the selection. They are going to make the selection at 27. I would be very, very shocked if the Heat did not make the selection at 27. Let me put it that way. Because even if they traded the pick, it makes a lot more sense to make the selection for another team, but actually have the Heat logo pop up and the guy come out and do the dun dun dun, and then the Miami Heat select blah blah blah. That makes way more sense, because if you do that, that unlocks the 2023 first round pick that you can then trade in addition to one of the 2028 or 2029 picks that the Heat unlocked at the deadline with the Oklahoma City deal. So if you pick somebody here, you could, for somebody else, you're in essence being able to trade 3 first round picks as opposed to just 2. All right. So if the Heat were going to make that star move, they would still probably make a selection here at 27, and then obviously trade that player. That said, the Ringer actually had somebody interesting today. Kevin O'Connor mocked Kennedy Chandler, the Tennessee point guard, to Miami, which I at first was like, that makes no sense. He's like 6 feet tall, undersized. The Heat have been trying to get away from being undersized for the last 2 years, especially in the backcourt. And he's a little bit of, an offensive first player, but I did some like surface level film stuff on him. I watched like a game or two and some other
Yep.
highlight clips on him. I like him a lot. I don't know if he's what the Heat really need, but he's a Heat kind of guy, and he's going to be one of the guys that when we do our blue notebooks later this week, I actually want to do a deep dive on him because I'm really excited about him.
Really?
Yeah.
That stands out. Okay. No, I mean, to my pointer, like, even as I'm thinking about it, like they've already got that position locked down. That doesn't necessarily mean they can't take somebody who can make an impact right away and also fill in that role for Lowry when he eventually retires in a couple
Exactly.
of years.
Yeah. And if
So
he's the
there
best
are
player on the board, you know what I mean? Like, he's ranked, ESPN has him at 19. So if you've got the 19th best prospect and it's between him and somebody that's like 30th, I don't know. Like, do you just take the best player available?
Yeah, so many great names to choose from. I was looking at a couple guys that did play for the G League Ignite team.
Yeah.
Jaden Terry,
Hardy.
sorry, Jaden Hardy. Excuse me. Sorry, I was thinking Dalen Terry.
Yeah.
Jaden Hardy. Another shooter, a guy who kind of, to be honest, he reminds me a little bit of Tyler Hero.
Yeah.
Same kind of.
He was
Same
like
kind
a
of body, same
top,
kind of approach.
wasn't he like the second rated high school guy coming out or
Yeah.
something like that? Top 5?
Big
Yeah.
time prospect. Had an inconsistent season with the Ignite, and so he's mocked a lot of places around the late 20s. So it seems like he's going to fit. But he seems like he's climbing up a couple of boards because I guess that talent always seems to find a way to rise to the top there. So a lot of teams now are kind of looking for that explosive score, but he hasn't been able to do it consistently yet. Again, we're going to go into these kind of details later on in the week.
Is he one of you're going to do a deep dive on him this week?
Yeah. Hardy and his
You
teammate,
are.
actually, another guy, Barjan Beauchamp. And now that's the guy that I think kind of fits that same need. One line from the scouting report that I was going to share later on, but he doesn't do anything at an elite level. And it's kind of counter to our point where maybe he doesn't necessarily make an impact right away, but I think he plays NBA level defense already. And he's got the prototype body for a long wing player. Like he's got like a 6'11" reach, wingspan, whatever,
Yeah.
6'7", tall, explosive. It's just he doesn't do anything like that stands out to you, but that's a guy that you can kind of mold and teach, get them to that level. And he's shown promise. He doesn't do anything badly either. So that's the counter to that, is that while he might not do anything so elite, he won't cost you a game. And I think that's something that stands out too. So a
So
lot
a
of
few
great
more
names.
names. Let's just go through them. The ones that you and I have decided that we're going to do deep dive scouts on this week. You got Malachi Branham out of Ohio State. I'm going to do EJ Liddell, his teammate,
Yep.
power forward at Ohio State, who compares himself to PJ Tucker. So that'll be interesting. You got the G League guys, Dalen Terry. I'm going to do his teammate Christian Coloco as well, and then Walker Kessler, another
Mhm.
center from Auburn. You've got Trevor Keels, Bryce McGowan's. I'm going to do Christian Braun from Kansas. I don't really know why, but I'm going
I
to.
don't either.
I really don't love watching Kansas basketball, but I'm gonna make myself do it anyway. And then you got also Wendell Moore Jr., the wing out of Duke. So a lot of really interesting names that we're gonna get into. And then before we just get out of this, the second round, the Heat don't have a pick in the second round. I'm just gonna say this: it would not shock me if the Heat bought their way into the second round.
Absolutely not.
They still have their max $6 million in just cash spending that they can use this offseason. Would not shock me if they bought their way into the second round. Would not shock me if they maneuvered some of these second round guys and their agents and got them to go undrafted in order to sort of pick them up and do the whole undrafted Miami Heat thing. There's a few names that we'll get into when we talk about sleepers later in the week, but just wanted to put that out there that just because they don't have a second round pick, they've
Right.
still been doing their due diligence with that sort of range of players.
Without a doubt. But you know who doesn't need their due diligence? That's LeBron James. I think he's a pretty well-established player at this point in his career, and he made some recent comments that might have some people wondering whether or not he'd be a great fit on this current edition of the Heat roster. We'll answer that in the next segment. But before we do that, just a reminder that Rock Auto is a sponsor of this show, and listen, they are your source for any parts that you might need for your car or truck. You could go to a traditional chain store, get the parts that you might be looking for there. If and that's a big if, they happen to carry them, you can go into their store. They'll ask you questions. You feel like you're being put on the spot. Maybe you don't answer them the way that they expect them to. They kind of look things up on their computer. That process takes time that you don't want to spend going to a store. Why bother going through that when you can find everything you're looking for on rockauto.com's easy to navigate website? They're a family-owned business that's been serving customers online for 20 plus years. You can't beat that. And again, you can just find everything with a few easy clicks. You get them shipped directly and safely to your door, and you save time and you save money because their same low prices are the same for everybody. You know, whether you're a do-it-yourselfer or a mechanic or anybody in between, you'll find what you're looking for at a great price at rockauto.com. So right now, go to rockauto.com, find what you're looking for your car or truck, and then go to the section that says, how did you hear about us? And write the phrase locked on so they know we sent you. That's amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need. That's rockauto.com. Just a reminder that you can always reach us via email at lockedonheat@gmail.com or via Twitter. Use the hashtag AskLHeat. Be sure to please subscribe to the show and leave a review. We're going to be continuing to provide great content, not just about the draft, but through the draft, up to Summer League, free agency, trade scenarios, everything you could want in an offseason for one of the best teams in basketball. So make sure to subscribe to the show to get all that great content. But there's some news lately. Speaking of content, it seems like this guy just loves stirring the pot. LeBron James recently on his show, The Shop, was asked by Maverick Carter, out of all the teams that are still left playing in the playoffs, of course, because the Lakers weren't in the playoffs, who would he want to play for? And he did say, the team that I would love to play for is not in the playoffs, which is the Lakers. Of course, he's got to give that answer. But he prefaces, if it was one team that I know could make an immediate impact in the postseason and we could be very special, it would either be Miami or Golden State for sure. So that was interesting. Like, of all the teams that are still in the playoffs or were in the playoffs, which ones he thought he could make an immediate impact and something special. That's a very particular way of phrasing it. Obviously, he's made some comments about wanting to play alongside Steph Curry earlier in the year. Those comments were not as well received by Curry as you might expect, but here he is talking about his old girlfriend, the Miami Heat, the whole college, right? The alma mater. Isn't that how we refer to this team?
Yeah.
I get, it stirs up a lot of news. It's great for clicks. We know that LeBron is a savvy media personality. who likes to stir the pot and just kind of make things make people uncomfortable. He likes letting everybody know you better come through, or else you know what, I might just find my way out the door. It's an interesting way to approach things. It certainly worked that way out in Cleveland twice. It worked that way in Miami as well, and maybe it could work out that way in Los Angeles. So if you were to force a trade, or if you were to look elsewhere, would you want LeBron James back on the Miami Heat roster?
Yeah, I would. I know that there's a huge segment of Heat fans that have nothing. They don't want anything to do with LeBron after he left in 2014. And I get it. They're still hurt by it and whatever, man. Like, I'm not one of these people that say, "Hey, get over it. Like, get out of your feelings." He was here for 4 years. It was a great time. Just let him live. Like, if you want to be upset about something, be upset. That's part of being a sports fan. If you want to be irrationally upset, be irrationally upset. That's up to you. You want to live your life that way? Go for it. Good. Have fun. But that's not how I'm going to live my life. And I look, when he says something special, he means win a championship. That's what he means. And so you put LeBron on this team the way that this Miami Heat team was in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Celtics. You put even this version of LeBron on that team. And I know this is not big three level LeBron. It's not the Kyrie Irving, Kevin Love, Cleveland Cavalier LeBron either. Who was arguably as good, if not better, than the Miami LeBron, right? Like, this is a different level. He's still one of the best 7 or 8 guys in the NBA.
I thought he was an MVP candidate for most of the year.
And it was a weird year.
But I mean,
I wouldn't count him out. I'm not counting. You put LeBron on this team with the level of shot creation that this team needed. Yeah, that team's going to the finals. I also tell you this. Any Heat fan that says, I don't want anything to do with LeBron, if LeBron announced, hey, I'm signing with the Miami Heat for the mid-level exception, let's go after this thing, everybody's bringing those LeBron James jerseys back from underneath their closet, and they're bringing them out again. Like, if LeBron wants to play for your team, you just say, yeah, man. That's how LeBron has made his entire career, is just being like, I want to play for you, and then every team doing backflips, trying to and going and jumping through hoops to try to create the cap space or whatever was necessary. So yeah, if LeBron was going to become a free agent and be like, I want to play for the Heat, and he signed with the Heat, obviously you take it. Obviously.
Yeah, I think 29 other teams would too. Like the Lakers certainly have him already on the roster, but I think there's no team that wouldn't want him for one reason or another. Like the Orlando Magic, who are clearly rebuilding. It's like, what? We get the name, the traction of having the best player, one of the most famous players, one of the most famous people, athletes in the whole.
The valuation of your franchise skyrockets as soon as you put LeBron in your jersey. Everybody's doing it. The Warriors too, by the way. I know that Steph Curry was like, "I'm good." It was his quote. Steph Curry don't make the rules, man. Like if LeBron wanted to sign with everybody loves Andrew Wiggins now and everything like that, but if it was Andrew Wiggins for LeBron, they're doing that, man. They are. Yeah. Sorry, Andrew Wiggins. That was fun. We'll take LeBron James. Thank you.
Yeah. He's been traded for LeBron before, so it wouldn't be.
That's true.
I always remember talking to you. Speaking of the valuation of the franchise, I remember talking to some of the Heat front office folks, like talking about jersey sales and the production and everything else like that. And the reason why they've had to lean into the Vice jerseys and everything else like that is because they don't have the big three on their roster. That if they had the big three on their roster, they could coast through the motions because those names sell no matter what.
They could just come out with the black tie jerseys again.
Yeah, military edition. What is it? The Stay Strong. What is it?
The camo, the Home Strong camo ones.
That still hurts my heart.
Great worst sentiment, ugly jersey. Great sentiment, ugly jersey.
Worst Heat jersey of all time, right? I know the black tie ones are your personal unfavorite.
Yeah, the black tie ones are mine, but they're both competing for the trophy that nobody wants.
Yeah. Having said that, look, I know a lot of people still resent LeBron, his departure, even now in context of, let's say you put all that past you. There are still some people who say, oh, he's going to change the kind of construction of this team. He's going to force them to do different things. He's older. He can't play that switchable defense. He can't do the things he once did. You want the ball out of Jimmy's hands and you want it in LeBron's hands instead? Why would you do that to your star?
Yeah.
Why do you have a guy like Kyle Lowry on your roster if you have LeBron James on there, et cetera, et cetera? And I got to say, I think all of those things, I won't say they fall to the wayside, but the reality is, yes, he's going to bend the team to his style of play because, well, it's worked out pretty good for the past.
He made it work with D Wade and Chris Bosh, and nobody could figure out how all those guys wanted to work out of the low block, and they all figured out how to make it work. And you don't think high IQ basketball players like Jimmy Butler and Lowry can't make it work? This isn't Russell Westbrook, right? Like LeBron has made it work with everybody other than maybe the most reluctant superstar of all, the stubborn superstar of all time in Russell Westbrook. And so I'm with you. Like, it would work. Like,
It
the
would
fit
work.
thing is a little overblown. I think actually the NBA and the NBA media kind of succumbs to a fit fetish a little too often, where we talk
Yeah.
about fit. Like, I was going back and looking at the trade grades for the Jimmy Butler, Josh Richardson deal, and they give the Sixers an A because Josh Richardson was a better fit than Jimmy
Mhm.
Butler, and the Heat got like a C plus or a B minus because Jimmy Butler wasn't a great fit. I was like, they just traded a second round pick, Josh Richardson, who we all liked, for a star in Jimmy Butler, and how did they get the worst grade? Like, that was because of the fit. So we overvalue fit a little too much. Not to say it doesn't matter. Clearly, it matters,
Yes.
but you need the talent first, and then you figure out the fit afterwards.
I don't even know what the question was. Like, what's the question about having your go-to player all of a sudden, like on a team that was looking to Tyler Johnson again? No knock on Bumpy. Like, I mean, like to look to those guys to be the stars of your team, and all of a sudden you've got an actual top 15-ish player,
Yeah.
an all-time all-star, great defender. It's like, you know what? Everything is going to figure itself out. You don't have to worry about the fit so much.
So what would you
I mean,
do if LeBron was? Let's talk about the LeBron fit. Let's just say.
yeah,
So I don't know what the trade would be, but let's just say like it was
okay.
he just signed for the
It's
middle
not
of
happening,
exception.
so let's forget it. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. But
Doesn't matter. Okay, yeah, it doesn't matter. Lowry, Jimmy Butler would be Lowry, Jimmy at the 2 guard spot, LeBron, PJ, and Bam. That would probably be the lineup, right? And if maybe you have to, I don't know.
yeah, yeah.
Doesn't really matter.
Switch
You're
things
right.
around. Yeah. No, the
More important
lineup
question:
matters.
is that team the favorite in the Eastern Conference? If you put LeBron on the Heat, is that team the favorite in the Eastern Conference?
I can't see a world in which it doesn't. Like again, we're talking about still even at age 30, 37, like still
Yeah.
a top 5 player in the league. Like, yeah, you worry about how to stop Giannis, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh wait a minute, you've got like 3 all-stars, 4 all-stars with Bam and a great role player or several great role players finishing
Yeah.
out that I mean, there's so much to like about that potential lineup. And again, I know that it's not going to happen. That's what I'm saying doesn't matter, because I know that's not going to
Doesn't
happen.
matter.
This is just more of a pointless flirtation from him. But at the same time, it's just like the idea of it, like pushing the floor, making those incredible passes.
We
It's
called it
LeBron.
pointless. Let's explore that a little bit. Is it pointless? Because you sort of alluded to the thing he said earlier this season where he was talking about like Sam Presti and the great GM job he was doing, and then the F them draft pick shirt that he was wearing in regards to the LA Rams, and then talking about how he wouldn't shut the door on a Cavaliers return and all this stuff. Like, is this pointless or is this strategic? Because I struggle to think that anything that LeBron says doesn't have an
Point.
agenda behind it,
That's for
but
sure.
I can't figure out what this one would be because I don't believe that he's trying to work his way back to Miami. I don't think that that's the
That
case.
that's the point. That's to me what is pointless. Is I don't think he's trying to, like, let's assume, and I think a lot of that water has passed under that particular bridge. I think he connected with Riles
Yeah.
at Chris Bosch's inauguration at the Hall of Fame, and so, I think he's certainly strong ties to Dwayne Wade, even though Dwayne isn't necessarily linked to this franchise any longer.
So you're saying Riley would bring him back?
I think he'd find whatever mat he could to put whatever key he has to in order to bring
Yeah.
LeBron back. Yes. So that's not the concern. The concern is also, again, to your point, there's a reason behind why he's saying these things, and it's to light a fire under the Los Angeles Lakers, not
Yeah.
necessarily to inspire Miami to make a trade for him. That's why I think it's a non-issue, even though it is a lot of fun to talk about.
The Warriors stuff is really interesting though, right? Because they could actually do the trade. If the Warriors called the Lakers and said, "Hey, we'll give you Wiggins because of the contract, expiring contract, by the way, so you can decide whatever you want to do with it, plus like all the young nice players that we have, like Wiseman, Kuminga, Moses Moody for LeBron, and basically just bail out the Lakers from the whole LeBron experience and kind of get them to reset their entire franchise around Anthony Davis and some nice lottery picks." Just saying. Like, LeBron keeps mentioning this is the first time we've heard the Heat, but he keeps mentioning Golden State. That's interesting. This is not
Yeah.
Locked On Warriors, and I don't host that show anymore. But
But would Warriors fans like that? Like, I feel like they would lean more towards
no, they're
not
doing the
having it.
same thing that the Heat fans do. Like, get him at no way. LeBum James, don't want him. And then as soon as he's wearing a Warriors jersey, they'd be like, this guy's the greatest. He's even better than Kevin Durant. Like, that's just the way sports fans work. It's just the way
That would
sports fans work.
inspire them. Yeah, if you could remind them that, hey, he's actually better than KD, that would give him another reason to like him better than. Just any reason to bag on Kevin Durant, I guess. Anyway, it's been a fun discussion, but we'll put a pin on this as we lean into our Blue Notebook scouting reports. Make sure to check out those episodes coming up over the next couple of days, because again, they're a lot of fun to talk about these players and how they could potentially fit and end up on the Miami Heat roster. But thank you so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure to go check out the Locked On NBA Big Board with host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and the author of the NBA Big Board newsletter. He's joined by Richard Stamen as well as Sam Ferris and Leif Lulin. They give fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft. They've got a mock draft, player rankings, and of course, big boards for you. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. This is David Ramil signing off for now. Thanks so much for joining me, Wes.
Wrap it up, B.